welcome to episode 8 of Things I Hear on the Misophonia Without Borders channel. You can call me Smooter, and this is the first episode of 2024. Hey, Doug, welcome back. How you doing? Doug says hi, y'all. Let's get the disclaimers out of the way first. I'll do my best not to make any triggering noises or gestures. And if you're a person who triggers when you hear descriptions of triggers, we've got you covered, at least as best we can. Because if one is coming, Doug will place this trigger description alert. There it is. Yeah, trigger description alert sign up over my head a few seconds ahead of time so that you know to mute me if you need to. And when the sign disappears, the trigger description is over and you can unmute me. The Misophonia Without Borders channel, this show, and I do not claim to have any cure for misophonia, nor do we offer any type of medical treatment, and you should be glad we don't. Because I'm just a guy with misophonia, and I'm here to talk about it. Okay, so we're calling this episode When Accidental Trigger Villains Become Heroes. And that is a mouthful, and what on earth is an accidental trigger villain? Well, let me explain. That's a term that I came up with for this episode. I don't know if it's going to become a thing, accidental trigger villain, but it works for the episode. And let me explain what that is. An accidental trigger villain is a person in the life of a person who suffers with misophonia, a person in that person's life who triggers them maybe quite regularly without meaning to, not meaning any harm, just living normal life. But some of the things they do may affect a person with misophonia. Some of those things are just normal life, and some of them may even be considered bad manners, but still affect the person with misophonia in ways that most people are not affected. A good example is potato chips. Now, of course, most of us are triggered by the sound of people eating potato chips, even with their mouths closed, and that would apply to me. And most of us, I think most of us, well, certainly a lot of us, are triggered by the sound of the rustling bag that the potato chips come in, at least according to a lot of the posts I see on Facebook, the rustling of the bag. And that, of course, is a trigger for me also. But how on earth can you eat potato chips without rustling the bag? And thank God I don't self-trigger. I mean, I eat potato chips, but when other people are doing it, yes, it triggers. But that's just normal life. And they don't always mean to do it. And then there's the more rude things, such as gum chewing, repetitive pen clicking, maybe bad manners, yes, but still don't affect most of the world the way it affects a person with misophonia. So an accidental trigger villain is someone who makes those triggers in your life probably pretty regularly without meaning to. And they will oftentimes try to be sensitive and maybe leave the room with their bag of chips or their gum or whatever. So basically, an accidental trigger villain isn't really a villain. This is more about the inconveniences of misophonia on the misophonia sufferer, the misophone, as well as the people around us. Because they're not really trying to do us harm, but, we're affected that way. But sometimes these villains can actually become the heroes too. And I'm going to tell you a story about that in just a second here. It's about a relative. And before I do that, I need to talk about relatives in misophonia for a minute. You may hear some of the other podcasts or streams out there, like the Misophonia podcast or Sephora Wiseman's channel, and they have people that they interview, and they may talk about things like, well, when I was a child, I remember my first trigger was my older sister, or my dad used to trigger me all the time, or my brother used to do this and on purpose, or my worst trigger was my lizard. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, that's all well and fine. If people do that, that's between them and whoever they're talking about. I don't have a problem with it. That's really none of my business anyway. The reason I bring that up is because you may or may not notice that when I'm talking publicly about people in my family or even friends who have been triggers in the past, I don't name them. That's just a rule I have. It's a general rule. There could be exceptions, never say never. But the general rule is that when I'm talking about people that trigger me, especially friends and family, I will not name them. And that's going to be the case here. As I tell you about this relative who was a accidental trigger victim, there I am throwing that term around again, who became a hero. Okay. So I also want to point out that my family has been very supportive since we found out what misophonia is, and that's what's been my problem for so many years, and I appreciate them for that. Thank God. I am blessed in a way that I know not everybody is, and I do recognize that. So on with the story. I have a relative who came to visit me along with, gosh, must have been at least 10 other people for my 18th birthday. So They came to our house in Virginia, and it was a long time ago when I turned 18. I mean, we had just discovered fire and we're starting to understand the practical applications of this thing called the wheel. I'm kidding. That's for you younger people out there. It was actually the 80s. And actually, what was happening in the 80s, one thing that I remember is I think this was around the time it was becoming a thing to watch videos that you rented at Blockbuster or the corner mom and pop video store on your VCR at home. And so this wasn't even the party. One night, uh, all my family's all in the living room, and it wasn't a huge living room, but there's at least 10 people in there watching a movie on the VCR. And this relative of mine comes out and he's got a pack of gum. And there's Doug with the trigger alerts. Thank you, Doug. Stay on top of that. You may need it quite a bit for these next few minutes. So he brings out this gum and he's being generous and polite and offering it to everybody. And maybe some people took it, maybe some didn't. I don't recall, but I know that I didn't because my misophonia started to develop for me sometime between the age of 15 and 17. I can't really narrow it down more than that. But here I am on the cusp of 18. So obviously, I already am aware of the problem at that point. I don't understand it. I don't understand why, but it's there. And now here's this relative whom I love with gum, and he's offering it to me. And of course, I can't. Oh, no, thank you. That's okay. And then he starts to chew his gum. And I won't describe this in detail for you because it even triggers me to think of it. But he has a particular method of chewing that not everybody has. And it makes it all the worse for me, or all the worse for any mesophone that would hear it, I'm sure. And it was just terrible. And suffice it to say, I missed most of that movie. Cut to a few years later, I'm moving to California. So now I'm 20, and this relative of mine is a little older, and I have never driven across the country, and he's done it at least a few times by then, probably several. And he meets up with me in Tennessee to help me out, for safety and everything, because I've, again, never done it before. I'm just a young guy. And we basically take a road trip across mostly the desert to California for 3 days. And I remember when he got in the car, I'm thinking, dear God, please tell me he doesn't still chew gum. Nope, he does. And so every time he would pull out a piece of gum, it would be the same as what I described earlier. So I would roll the window down of the car. It didn't matter if I was the driver or if he was taking his turn driving and I was a passenger, whichever. If there was gum going in his mouth, I would roll the window down of the car. Just occurred to me that some of you may not know what this motion is. This is rolling down the window of the car. And pretty much most cars before, I don't know, I guess maybe the mid 90s, early 2000s, we didn't always have electric buttons. A lot of cars, you had to crank the window down, and that car had to crank the window down. But I digress. There I am sticking my head out of the window. We're doing 70 miles an hour down the interstate, etc. And he's chewing gum, and I've got the wind in my hair because I had hair back then, in fact, quite a bit of it. Now, the saving grace was when the gum would lose its flavor, he'd lose interest, and it would usually be a little while before he'd get another piece of gum. So eventually, I could bring my head back in the car, and didn't tell him. I didn't want to be disrespectful. I didn't understand what was going on. It was embarrassing and weird for me that I felt this way about things such as gum at the time, and I moved to California. So cut to later, and I visit this relative just about every week, once a week. And he has gum at home, of course. I mean, it's his house. Why wouldn't he? And every now and then he would break it out and I would disappear. Basically, what I would do usually is I'd grab his TV guide and I'd go to another room and literally read it from cover to cover. Sometimes I would even do the crossword puzzle. But what was ensured was that by the time I was done with that TV guide, his gum would have lost its flavor and already been back out of his mouth by the time I came back in the room. Well, his wife figured out what was going on and said something to him. I know this because she told me about it later. But basically, she said, he's having a problem when you chew gum. For some reason, he can't be around it and he leaves the room and he doesn't come back until you're done. He does that every time he comes over. It's a problem for him. So, this relative, having been informed of something by his wife that none of us could understand at the time because misophonia wasn't going to be discovered for a few more years and it was going to be at least a few decades before I even knew about it still. So we just knew it's this weird thing. And she tells him and he stopped. I haven't seen this man chew gum in over 25 years. He never said anything to me about it. I wouldn't know what happened if she hadn't told me. But basically what happened is she told him it was a problem and he stopped chewing gum around me and never said a word about it to me. Never made an issue. What can I say? I'm blessed. that's a hero. And I hope there's someone like that in all of your lives. Maybe you have to look out for them to see who they are. But I hope that everyone has at least a few relatives and friends like that. And of course, again, this person now knows about the misophonia, and like the rest of my family is very supportive about it. So in that, I am blessed. And I hope hearing the story does something for you, especially since that's basically the end of the show. I'm going to close now. But before I go, of course, I got to say, please like the video. And I mean that because I really want you to like it. And I also would like you to like it and subscribe to the Misophonia Without Borders channel. And I know that some of you come to these videos and this channel through third-party means where we placed an ad or just a post, such as Facebook or Twitter or something. And sometimes you'll put likes and comments on those mediums because that's where the link is. And I appreciate that. Please keep doing that. But also, please put your comments and your likes here on the actual YouTube channel where these videos are happening. And subscribe to the channel, of course. We'd love to see you interact with us. We'll try to interact with you, and we'll try to keep putting up good, useful content about the Misophonia experience. And with that, I will share a special announcement from the Misophonia Association. If you don't already know, you're about to find out. Okay, so it's good news from the Misophonia Association, and here it comes. It's not exactly a Misophonia Without Borders quick talk. No, it's definitely not. But you can still call me Smooter, and I'm just sharing some news here, passing on an announcement. Now, for those of you who don't know, I am on the board of the Misophonia Association, and I will brag about that because I'm happy to be part of such a good thing. And I thank them for bringing me on last year, which gave me my first opportunity to help with planning last year's Misophonia Convention. That's right. The Misophonia Association puts on a Misophonia Convention every year, for those of you who don't know. And last year we had it in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this year we're going to have it in not New York City. I'm just wearing the hat because I don't have a hat for where we are having it. Look at the background if you don't recognize that. That is Atlanta, Georgia. That's right. I said Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia. That's where we're going to be this year. We are bringing the convention to you. We don't know the dates yet, but it's usually in October, November. We'll keep you posted. In the meantime, please subscribe to this channel and keep a watch. The convention is coming to you.